Hello, everyone. Welcome to this newest episode of The Silver Lining. I'm Kevin Ashley,
I'm Nicole Littlefield.
And I'm Danny Oliveris.
and today we're talking about Black History Month, the shortest month of the year.
Why is that? Who decided to make Black History Month February?
So I'm pretty sure it's actually like a proper I've seen like multiple things between like there being like an arbitrary reason, like a legitimate reason to do so. I'm pretty sure there's like a legitimate reason to it being February, or it could just be like the country saying, "Fine, we'll give you something, but it'll be the shortest month of the year." Like that's something the audience can look up.
Well, I hope it's the first one and not the second one.
But yeah, at like the college though, they always like yearly do something for Black History Month, which I think is actually pretty impressive. Like, how long have like each of you been at the college?
My first semester was fall of 2019, so 2 years now.
How about you, Danny?
I think I was there. I know I was there like 2016
Mm-hmm.
is when I started, I think. So what is that, like 4 years now? 5 years, something like that?
Yeah, it's 2021. I've been at the college for at least a little over 2 years at this point because I was the graduating class of 2018. So, yeah. And like each time February rolls around, the college always like rolls out like a big thing for like there's posters everywhere, there's flyers, they're showing off like great Black creators that get like ignored throughout history. I have like this poster behind me of a bunch of like Black history stuff that's always like looking over me overnight, which I'm not 100% sure if they're like ghosts watching me or like those paintings from Harry Potter, but it is what it is. And if there's one thing I do enjoy, especially like the events, like you see like musicians come by, there's like speakers who come every year consistently. I've noticed the college brings like a group with them of like African like dancers and whatnot, and it's really like interesting watching the dance of like, well,
Isn't that just students, I think it was students, right? Like that are in a dance class, but they do or something like that. I don't know. I
Yeah,
might
I
be
think
totally
it's
wrong.
students.
you think
Yeah,
it's student? I thought it was like an actual
yeah.
group they brought in.
No. I think it's students that like for Black History Month, they like choreograph this whole like African dance or something. I don't know exactly what it is. I don't know any of the logistics behind it, but I remember being there. I think it was last year I think it was last year. For for one of my classes, I had to film it for the college. I don't know if you remember, Kevin.
Yeah, I think I went up to you
For
at that event and like talked to you.
yeah, yeah.
Because I remember for like the 2 years that I've been here, I've been to like each one of those performances, and one of my favorite parts is when they bring in people from the crowd to help them, and it's always funny because you see one of two things. There's like the people who like get the dance off the bat and are like keeping up with like simple movements and whatnot, or those are the ones who are just like completely lost and like off beat, and they're just like doing the best they can. Either way, it's always entertaining.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when one time we were there, there was this old lady there, and she said she would always show up. Like she was talking to me. I was like, "Lady, I don't want to talk to you. I'm working." But she was like, "Oh, we would always like, or I would always come to these." And now she's like, I think she was like in her pretty late years, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And like she was still there, and she was like, having a good time, dancing and everything. So yeah, it's pretty nice to see, I guess. Yeah.
It's nice to view like another culture that isn't like, well, European representing itself in like a predominantly white space, I think. And it's good for like other Black and African American students to like enjoy the culture of a continent that we
Yeah.
all don't remember.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I think something that's like consistently forgotten when it comes to like Black history and like Black culture as a whole is like how unique it is in the sense that it's not really based in like ancestral holdings. Because what I mean by that is that when it comes to like Black people generally, unless they migrated here from Africa, like in recent years. Most Black people can like trace their history back to like slavery. And one of the many things that like the slavers did at the time is they did their best to like erase our culture, our heritage. You'll be hard pressed to find like a Black person who could trace like their history back to slavery to know which like ethnic group they came from in Africa. And there's hundreds of them. They don't know what like tribe they're from, what culture and traditions that were there, which to me is what makes Black culture so unique, because it's not something that was born out of like an ethnic group. It was something that was born out of a bunch of people from multiple ethnic groups being like, well, we're all here together. We have in common our skin color. So let's work off that. And I think it's a really fascinating thing.
Yeah, because it's two different types of Black culture, right? Like there's like traditional African Black culture that we've seen in like those traditional dances we saw in the college, right? But then there's other types like like a little bit more modern, like help me out here, like Tupac, right?
Yeah,
and
like hip hop or like
yeah.
Oh, the amount of like stuff that is like inspired out of like Black culture and Black history. Like for starters, rock and roll. What do you think rock and roll? Do you think Black music?
Not really.
Typically, no. I'm a big rock and roll fan, right?
And rock and roll took its inspirations from blues, jazz, gospel, and like one other thing that I'm forgetting. And its creator is credited as Chuck Berry, a Black man.
Yeah.
Like Black people made rock and roll. They originated it, and it grew out from there with the population of Elvis and whatnot. And just it's one of those many things that we like never got credit for.
I did not know that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's I've been doing a lot of research on the Who, which is a British rock band from like the 70s. And the songwriter says he took a lot of inspiration from Chuck Berry, which is like like you said, he's a great musician, and he's a great rock musician. Like I love some of his songs. Like some of his songs are great.
And there's just like it's a fairly recurring theme in like America that Black people would like make something, that thing would then get like absorbed into like the rest of like the mainstream, and then like we'd never get credit for it. Like a lot of like country music, which you think would be like primarily just white, yet again its roots can be found in like Black artists and Black musicians. The banjo is actually like modeled off of an African instrument. And there's just like a lot of different things in this country that can find its roots or like its origins from stuff that Black people have done. It's not really taught in the history books for, well, reasons.
Something that I hate about our education system is that we are really only taught like, I don't know if you guys have seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, but one of my friends is always talking about how we are the Fire Nation, in the sense that the Fire Nation is taking over, and then they are teaching their kids wrong information about history. And so the US is kind of like that in the sense where we don't learn anything about, well, we learn about like Harriet Tubman and Martin Luther King, but those are like really the only two Black figures that we learn about as kids.
And it's very sanitized what it is too.
Yeah, and it's horrible. And that's why I really like that COD is doing this. They have so many different like they are doing a daily Black history update on the COD website, and every day they're posting information about different Black people that are about their history and why they're important, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, to that point, I mean, this is not necessarily Black history related, but I mean, to that point, I don't know, like the whole like what is it, the Trail of Tears thing. Like we massacred millions of Native Americans, right? And that was never covered. Like I didn't know that till like, fairly recently,
It's like,
and I think there's people who still don't know that, and like, like the our school systems, they don't teach you that, that they're like, oh, they teach you about like, Nazi Germany and all the shitty things they did. But it's like, we did shitty things too. And I think it's important to know that, because, that's how we learn. We learn from our mistakes. We learn from our history.
Exactly. It's like one of like the weirdest things to me. It's just like I understand not wanting to teach like how brutal the past was, but there comes a point between like trying to like protect young minds and just flat out lying to them. Especially when it comes to like atrocities that were committed in America's past that we're not exactly proud of. Like Germany's a prime example of doing some like fucked up shit and then taking ownership of it, apologizing for it, and moving the fuck on.
Yeah, but
like,
even in Germany though, like if you mention that, like I think there's like jail time or something. And don't quote me on that. I might be 100% wrong.
It's one of those things in Germany where like if you like do like the Heil or shout like anti-Semitic stuff or just like start doing Nazi stuff in public, that will land you in jail because of how much they aren't with it anymore.
It's also, you can't claim that the Holocaust did not happen. That's like what I'm pretty sure that's another one of their laws, which I think is like obviously
Alex Jones.
That's why he's not in Germany. That's why he's.
They know what they did is bad, and so they are trying to make amends for it, and they can't. It's one of those things where you can't really make amends for killing that many people, but at least they're trying. At least they're saying, "Hey, we're not going to pretend like we didn't do this," which I think is like. I'm not saying that the U.S. does that, but at the same time, I don't know what the U.S. does, so they could be hiding stuff from us that we don't even know about.
It's a constant struggle to get America to like admit its past sins because like some people take wanting like the country to acknowledge that it treated insert group here badly as like a sign of like weakness or like a sign of attacking the nation when it's just wanting people to own up to past mistakes. Like at this point in time, when the conversation of like reparations come up again for slavery, initially I was like on the fence about that issue because I'm like, well, no one alive today lives through that. But then I think about it and I'm like, to be fair, the government never like stopped oppressing Black people until like 60 odd years ago. Like my grandma lived through Jim Crow and whatnot. My parents are at the tail end of the civil rights movement. Like there's so much stuff that this country did after slavery that like still kept people down to this day. And even then, I don't even think that like reparations should be like a every Black person gets X amount of dollars. It should be more around the line of like taking these communities that are in poverty and like improving them, like public works, liveling up the areas, better education. Like this is stuff that can be done and improve like the tangible material conditions of these people to account for past sins. But to even consider that is either socialism or trying to guilt white people.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm sorry. Go ahead, Nicole.
I was just gonna go back to your like about how people are still alive. That's so weird. About like who went through the Jim Crow laws. Like that blows my mind. It's shocking that it was not that long ago.
Mm-hmm. It's surprisingly quick how like we've changed off of those things, like how the public consciousness has like moved away from being like overtly racist. Not to say there isn't any overtly racist people still around, but it's no longer socially acceptable to just walk up and call me boy or the N-word. Like, so that's like a step in the right direction. And it's like a bad trait that our country tends to have when it comes to just wanting to like sweep things under the rug that make us uncomfortable. Because I really do think that like every nation should do this. If you've done something wrong, just own up to it. Like you should never feel eternally guilty about something. Mistakes were made and terrible things happen. But to flat out ignore that you've done that is even worse in my opinion, because then like you're trying to like to gaslight them. It's just like, I mean, yeah, we did that, but it wasn't that bad. It's like then you read into like the atrocities that were committed during slavery, and it's like, okay, but like that was so far in the past. And then you read about the stuff that happened after slavery, and it's like, oh, come on. And it's like, no, like we just want like a solid acknowledgement of guilt and then what you want to amend it, and then we can all move on. Like we wouldn't even be talking about race issues today if it wasn't for, well, Lincoln's assassination and his like predecessor coming over and then going out of his way to make sure the South stayed racist. Like every bit of legislation that Congress tried to pass in order to like stop the South from actively discriminating against like freed slaves at the time, he vetoed, shot down. Like he went above and beyond to make sure that the South would still stay like as terrible as it was at the time, which I personally believe that if he didn't happen, like 80% of the issues the Black community has today wouldn't exist. Like if Black people just would have got like their, what was like 20 acres and a mule, it would have been fine. Like shit. There's so much stuff that happens in the past that if you don't recognize and acknowledge today, there's no way you can like accurately address
I think
future present
I think
problems.
I think the problem with that is that like some people feel like you're attacking them directly,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Like for example, like how you're saying, we just want you to admit guilt, and they're like, oh, well, I wasn't there, I wasn't the one, doing those things. Like, why should I admit guilt? I
Oh,
think
I'm not.
that's
Well, yeah, and
what a lot of people feel super
Mhm.
defensive about, and so I
and I
understand that.
can
I think
and I can like
because
oh,
yeah,
sorry,
go
keep
ahead,
going.
go ahead, no, go ahead.
And like and I completely understand like that defensiveness. Like if some rando came up to me and said, "Hey, I want you to apologize for something your ancestors did," I'll be like, "The fuck you on about? I didn't do anything about that." But that's not the thing any Black person, well, I can't say any Black person because there's millions of us, but
Right.
any reasonable person wants. No reasonable person wants every single white person to apologize for sins of
Right.
the past. We just want a general statement from the government because that's what it was, the government that committed most of these atrocities, or at least allowed it to happen. So like
Yeah.
just like a public statement or like something would have been
Yeah.
nice. Like
Yeah.
when the
I think also
Japanese are
like
put into like internment camps / concentration camps, because they technically meet the definition of a concentration camp, but not a death camp. Like when the Japanese were put in that, they got reparations for it because the country quickly recognized it. Like, yeah, that was fucked up. Like we shouldn't have shoved you all in there and ruined all of your lives because we thought you were insurgents. Which is, it's really weird, that Japanese internment camp thing too. I wrote like a paper on that my junior year of high school because in Hawaii, which had a rather large Japanese population, not a single one of them were interned. But in the mainland United States, it was like millions of people, which is weird because Hawaii was even the state that was attacked by the Japanese. And they didn't intern any of the Japanese citizens because they understood that it wasn't them. Which is, I don't know, it's a rather interesting thing, and to talk about xenophobia too.
yeah. Yeah, I think like to go back to what you were saying about you can't say that it's mostly reasonable people, right? Like we're mostly dealing with reasonable people, but I think that sometimes what is highlighted is that like loud minority, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
like on like just going insane off of like be it left or right or whatever, like it's usually the minority that's the loudest, and it sucks to see that sometimes, because then the other side will be like, oh well, look at them, see how they're crazy and yada yada yada, and I think that's where it kind of starts. Or
One of
I
my
don't know.
like main issues that I have with like how our current like media apparatus and like sphere currently is how like all of it, because well, capitalist society, everything's based off profit, and outrageous stuff gets clicks. So there's always an incentive to talk about the radicals and like anything, or like the insane people and anything, even if they aren't an accurate representation of the topic as a whole, because well, people are going to click on that. And I think it's like it's partly the company's fault, partly the general public's fault for like wanting sensationalized stuff. Like although people say, "Oh, I wish the news would just report news," but like the news does just report news, and nobody clicks on it, so they have to report other stuff in order to make money. So it's partly
Right.
our fault, partly theirs.
We want to be entertained, and that is a big problem. That also kind of brings up the point of the media and how like there needs to be more people of color representation in the media. And just because we reflect when we watch stuff, we reflect it on our own lives, and that's what we see and that's what we think. So if we start adding more people of color and adding more diverse things into our media, then it will be a lot easier for people to accept other things. And yeah.
My thoughts entirely. Like that's why Black Panther was such a big movie for the Black community. Like He's a black superhero from like this super advanced technological country in the middle of freaking Africa. Like, that's amazing for small kids who want someone who like looks like them in like looking cool. Like when I was growing up, when I turned 8, Obama became president, and that was like such a big thing for me and all like the other kids around me in my primarily black school district at the time, because we were learning about history and all of the leaders of this great nation looked nothing like us. They had none of our interests in mind, and as we looked into our history a bit here and there, all we would saw was like black people consistently being victimized by this country. And then we see one of us at the highest levels of power in this country. Now, it doesn't exactly end racism, but it made a lot of us happy. And it like those things I believe genuinely do matter for like small kids, like just growing up. Because when you're trying to find yourself in this world and trying to figure out where you want to go and where you want to be, it's very hard to see yourself in certain areas where other people like you haven't been.
Exactly. That was something that I never even considered because as a white person, I grew up being able to see all the Disney princesses look like me. And then when I got into high school and people were talking about that, I was like, damn, that really sucks. They really do need to make more princesses with different skin colors and different backgrounds. And I mean, there aren't that many, but they are starting to make more, which is good.
Mm-hmm. It's like you had your pick between like a bunch of Disney princesses. My sister had like Tiana, and Tiana was a frog for most of her movie.
Yeah, I got to pick between blonde, red hair, brown hair, like any of them, and you get one.
Yeah,
you got one, and then we're called ungrateful when we say that like she was a frog for most of her movie.
I personally never really had that issue. I mean, I'm not white, but like I never really had that issue of like, oh, these people don't look like me. I don't know. I just never saw that personally. I don't know. For me, it's always been like, yeah, like you know, not being able to get somewhere is more like money wise. Like, oh man, like fuck,
And that's an entirely valid reason. Like, I think this is a good like disclaimer to have that I am obviously not like the spokesperson for all people of color in this nation. And it's like there are plenty of people out there who don't think that way, the way I mentioned before. But for the ones who do, it means a gigaton, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It definitely doesn't take anything from like, anybody else. I mean, that's just me.
Like it's one of those harmless things that you can do to make people's lives a little bit better. Like,
yeah, like I can like I said, I personally have no, feelings one way or the other towards that. But like, my sister who's trying to become a lawyer and whatnot, or do whatever she does, she takes inspiration from people like AOC and stuff like that. Like, that empowers her. And, I can understand that. I can see that, and like how you mentioned, when you were 8 and you saw Obama get elected, like that's huge, right?
Yeah.
So
it was big for me. And it's just one of those things where representation in media in like any aspect all just like makes sense. Because as I said before, and it may not be the case for everyone, it helps. It gives options. Like it proves to people that these things are possible and you can do them. So the sky is really the limit. And there's also like a lot of good movies that come out of it too, like those like harrowing stories. Like everyone ever watch Hidden Figures?
no.
But I keep
so Hidden Figures is a really good movie. It basically talks about the 3 black scientists who helped get us to the moon, who helped plan the trajectory, who helped like they did a lot of like legwork and were really like instrumental in like figuring out how we can get there before the Russians. And they never really got their credit in their time. But as we went on and as history like kept going out, they started getting more notoriety, and they even got like a really good movie. And one of them was alive still to see it. So that was good. And now they're naming another rocket after her, I believe. She's dead now, unfortunately, but they are naming a rocket after her because she was instrumental in like getting America into space.
That's awesome.
It's like there was 3 of them that were just instrumental at doing it, and they did it really well. Women had a big hand in helping us get into space. Black women in particular, though.
Again, do we not hear about these things in school? Like, why am I just learning about this now?
I would say it's because our textbooks are written usually by old white guys who don't care much about it. Like, people think that history is written by the victors, and like, it's not. History is written by historians. And ultimately, those historians' biases and the knowledge that they gather at the time is ultimately what matters. Like, take World War II, for example. Shortly after World War II ended, historians wanted to write down what was happening like fast. And thankfully, they had a bunch of like primary sources because a bunch of like ex-Nazi generals and like commanders were still around. So they interviewed them. And that's how we got the original narrative of like Germany being this unstoppable war machine. And Hitler was the reason why it all like came tumbling down, because he was incompetent, especially when they invaded Russia, because those generals talked up their own achievements while downplaying their mistakes and blaming Hitler for anything they couldn't really downplay. And then once the Soviet Union collapsed and we managed to actually gain access to like the records in there, we learned that, oh, Germany wasn't as unstoppable as we thought they were, because they did catch the Russians by surprise, that's true, but once they caught on to how the Germans functioned, they managed to counter them rather effectively. So ultimately, history is written by historians and the information they want to gather and can gather at the time. The victor doesn't necessarily matter all that much unless they're like really deep in wanting to write that history, you know?
I think that we, even as journalists, are writing history because we're reporting the news. And that's also a big reason why it's bad that the journalism field is dying. And why, because I know so many people who are like, there's so much fake news, there's so much like, there's not real news being put out there anymore. And a big part of that is because journalists aren't getting paid anymore. It's a dying field. And so more companies like Google and Facebook are able to post, or like BuzzFeed are able to post these things. And then who knows where they're getting their facts from.
Mm-hmm. It's like professional journalism is one of those fields that like you need like a strong journalist core in your country in order to like find truth and like stick it to power and stuff like that. Without it, you could really go down the realm of like authoritarianism, and whether that's far left authoritarianism or far right authoritarianism, it's never a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually did a whole project on like the journalism dying and everything, and I didn't realize how scary of a thought it is, but if we don't have people reporting the news and what's happening and giving real facts, we're all just going to be left in the dark, and that's a really terrifying thought.
Political hot take, and then we can jump back to Black History Month. The only reason why our news apparatus, in my opinion, the only reason why our like media and fact apparatus is so like hostile right now is because conservatives acknowledge that academia, the scientific community, and just reality itself wasn't agreeing with their worldview. So instead of changing their positions, they challenged reality and somehow fucking won. And now everyone operates on 2 separate facts depending on your political ideology, where I think I'm operating in the realm of reality and looking at what are like liberal leaning sources. Conservatives think they're operating in their realm of reality, but like conservative leaning sources that either deny climate change or diminish it, still claims Trump won the election and it was stolen by a democratic cabal in South American and the European nations working together. There's also QAnon going about everywhere. Like the conspiratorial news has really like boasted in recent years with OAN and like Newsmax and Breitbart all being taken as now legitimate conservative news outlets instead of just places that crack out conspiracies and say fear tactics 24/7. But hey, I guess that's what happens when reality isn't on your side on an issue. You deny reality. But yeah, okay. Now that's over. We can jump back to it. Speaking of
to get back a little bit to like, you know, the whole Black history and like Something that I think is kind of like interesting, if you guys haven't checked it out, there's this documentary on Netflix called Devil at the Crossroads.
Hmm.
It's a short documentary about Robert Johnson. He's a blues singer songwriter. It's an interesting documentary if you guys want to check it out.
What is it about?
There,
It's about Robert Johnson.
Well,
And
like,
his,
yes.
he's like well, I don't know. It's a short documentary. It's not long. It's like I think 30, 40 minutes, something like that. So I would just say check it out. Like,
there is this one movie that came out on Amazon recently called, I think it's called One Night in Miami. It involves Sam Cooke, Muhammad Ali, and Malcolm X, like three giants in Black history. And well, they all got together in Miami one night and started talking about the things that they could do, their potential and whatnot. I'm not, I haven't watched the movie yet because I think it's behind a paywall. So once it's available for me to like access, I do plan on watching it. It's again a really excellent film talking about those. And like Sam Cooke, in my opinion, is a truly amazing artist. Like some of his songs were like really influential to me growing up. Like hearing when I was like his songs to me are like a massive throwback because my parents used to play them a lot when I was a kid. So listening to them now is like giving waves of nostalgia. Some of his music was even used in Guardians of the Galaxy. What was the song? It was Bring It On Home to Me. I like Home to Me, I think the name of the song was played where Star Lord was dancing with that green girl whose name I forgot. Gamora. There we go. And yeah, that was Muhammad Ali, amazing fighter. Malcolm X, civil rights activist who was like similar to Martin Luther King, but also didn't rule out violence and self-defense and like it being necessary in instances. But yeah, also the demonization of Malcolm X, I think is like something like the man is not perfect, obviously, but like given the fact that how he was portrayed in our history books is like this violent actor who needs to be like never modeled and ignored, I think is a bit hyperbolic given the fact that he really just like talked about the same black liberation that Martin Luther King did. It's just that
I
he
think
wasn't. Hmm?
I think that it's because when you put them side by side, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, like Martin Luther King is obviously the more like teachers are going to want to talk
He's
about
the
Martin
more
Luther.
digestible one.
Yeah, where so I don't. Yes, I see what you mean by the demonization, but I feel like it's really just because we compared them. When you talk about them individually, I feel like there's not as much of that demonization on Malcolm X.
Mm-hmm. And he even like changed his mind and some of his more like violent views near the end of his life because like he realized like wouldn't like get anywhere. Like the man has like he's a really interesting person. I recommend y'all like read up about him. Anyone's like listening as well because there's more to a lot of like black history than is portrayed in books. And you can learn a lot of it from like taking a class, like an elective in your high school or college. I do think a lot of this stuff should be taught more in general history, considering the fact, excuse me, considering the fact that well, Black history is American history and should be like represented more in like American like history classes. I think instead of just like what Europe did for the past couple hundred years, and then going over to America, but only covering the accomplishments of like a handful of black people and the majority of it just being white people. Because American history is the history of all the people who have done things of of noteworthiness in our country, no matter their skin color or ethnic background. And I think that should be more the focus in our books.
I think it's so funny that we pride ourselves of being the melting pot, of having so many different ethnicities and cultures, but yet we only teach about the European side. I keep telling myself that I need to learn more history about other cultures. And I can do that I'm planning on doing that once I transfer to a university. But I think it's ridiculous that we don't get taught about this stuff like it's an elective in high schools rather than a requirement. I definitely think that it should be a requirement because we should not be ignorant about other cultures, especially when we are talking about how we are we are the melting pot of all these different cultures, and I just so hypocritical.
It's just like it's one of those many things of like American like ideals and like idealistic things that we have that we proclaim that we want and project on the rest of the world and haven't exactly like reached ourselves yet. And it's something that can be improved upon and done within our lifetimes. It's just the fact that like reactionaries are going to react and hold us back at every point in time. Whenever you try to like make history more accurate, it's instantly turned into you're trying to rewrite history. And it's like, no, history was already rewritten. We're fixing it. We're trying to get it better for the next generation. There's a difference here. Like all because we want to teach more about like the minorities who did great things in this country and focus a little bit less on like what Joe Schmo did with a shoe. Like I don't see how that's a big of an issue.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like Nicole said, I think it is stupid that we don't know about this stuff, you know? Like, I think what we should do is, uh, you know, because I think that where it, like the problem stem from is ignorance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you cure ignorance, right? By knowledge. You learn this shit, you know. And we have, I mean, like a lot of us don't know it and won't seek it, right? So I don't know. Schools, that's where it has to start, I think. You know.
It's like children ultimately are the ones who are going to have to like do better with how like political, how like polarized we are nowadays. Things are like, even if you try to educate
Right,
someone,
but like not
willful
even make
ignorance
it
is a thing.
political. Like just learn that there is another side to
Well, like that's like the problem though.
us,
Everything
right?
somehow becomes political, no matter the
I
issue.
hate that so much. Yeah, I hate
Like,
that so much.
and no
We,
matter the
I know
issue,
we keep
one
going over it,
side
but
makes
like
it political.
I know we keep going over it, but it just blows my mind how like the whole mask wearing thing has become like, oh, you know, you're wearing a mask. What are you, a libtard? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
dude,
You
you know,
beta
like,
cuck, and it's like,
right.
just wear the mask. We could have been over this. But yeah, it's one of those things where both sides want to score points on the other, and
Yeah.
uh, it's this whole debacle, which is why I'm just like I think there's two types of ignorance in this world. There's circumstances, circumstantial ignorance and willful ignorance. Circumstantial ignorance just means that like their circumstances did not allow you to learn information that would have been like good for you to know. Like you can't be blamed for your circumstances; you had no control over them. Willful ignorance, I think, is condemnable because that's people who have like the action, like who have like the option and like the will and like all the like ability to do and learn more and educate themselves, but they actively choose not to. I don't blame someone for being ignorant off of circumstances. I blame you for being ignorant if you like actively choose to ignore readily available knowledge. Like the phrase Google is free exists for a reason. But
Yes.
hey, Google's far too liberal nowadays, and it's just going to show you propaganda and blah, blah, blah.
Just make sure that you look at good sources. That's literally the one thing that I learned from school that I think has been the most, like, the best thing. You just got to make sure that you know who's telling you the information. Make sure that it's not some random person writing a blog post.
Yeah. And like ultimately, I think what a lot of people need to understand what, like media literacy is like everyone has a bias. Like biases are not inherently bad or good. Biases, I think, are like a bias can be good, bad, or neutral. It doesn't matter. But everyone has them. What's important to recognize is when you're reading a source is to recognize the bias in it. Like if I'm reading something that's fairly like left leaning, I'm like, okay, I know where this is coming from. These people are fairly left leaning. It's gonna be this and so there's probably like an opposing right leaning view out there. This shouldn't just be accepted as gospel. And it should be the same thing for like sources like OAN, Newsmax, and Breitbart. You would think those three would be like people would look at those sources and be like, okay, this probably shouldn't be accepted at face value, considering the fact that they've made their entire shtick about being incredibly conservative. But I guess that's another thing that needs to be like dealt with education is like teaching children how to recognize biases and whatnot.
Um, Going kind of back about CUD, if you want to learn more about Black history, the Black Student Alliance is a great place to go. I believe David Swope is the advisor for it, and he's a great guy. He usually runs the diversity like workshops, and he's very open to talking about things. I don't know. I haven't talked to him that much, but I've heard great things about him. I've been to some of his like workshops and stuff, and he's just a great person. So if you want to learn more, the Black Student Alliance is a great place to go.
Yep, I agree with that because I don't think I ever had time to show up to a meeting because my classes would always get in the way. But I did talk to the man at one point for a club. Like there's like the club tabling that COD did, and it was at that tabling I was able to like talk to him about Black Student Alliance and get more information about the things that the college does for its students and whatnot. Like the
He's
man's a good wealth of knowledge if you want to learn more about these things.
Yeah, and he's so open to talking. I mean, this was on campus, so I mean, I'm sure things are a little different now, but I'm sure you can email him. He might even have office hours and stuff like that. But I remember, like, he didn't even know who I was. We were just in this like group of people, and he was like, "I don't care who you are. Talk to me. If you see me in the hall, you can stop and say hi." Those were probably not his exact words, but you get the idea.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, and with that, we are reaching the end of our show today. So, Danny, something you'd like to add?
Yeah, like Nicole said, I think, if you want a place to start, you can always start at COD. But I think overall message that I think anybody should take away is acceptance. At the end of the day, it's acceptance. Whether it be black, white, Mexican, pink, yellow, whatever the fuck. It's all about acceptance. Because like I said, I think the biggest problem is ignorance, and accept that there is another side to things. There's always two sides to a story, and you know be open to other ideas, to other people, and whatnot. Because I mean, what's it gonna do at the end of the day? Like, is it gonna kill you? No, probably not, right?
Chances are, no.
Yeah. So I mean, look at us. We're all three different cultures coming together, talking about you know just
Random
stuff.
stuff.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That sometimes can get out of hand, or or sometimes it's like something actually knowledgeable. Like I think today, I think this is an important discussion to have about, like, that yeah, there is on the other side, and it's important to know that. So accept the people around you, don't be an asshole.
Basically,
Everyone just wants to be accepted.
live your life as if everybody did it, would it be a just society?
Right.
And on that note, that's our silver lining. And to end it up as we always do, despite how dark the clouds may be, remember to always search for the silver lining. Thank you for joining us.